Okay, right. Thank you very much. I believe that I had done something last week so that you are interested about getting into this and getting to know more about it. So today, where we stopped was we were supposed to discuss the risk-based audit planning next. So I kind of kept it for this week. Right. So let's see what we are up to today. So before we understand risk-based auditing, can you raise your hands if you know about risk? What is risk? Why risk? Do you know anything about different types of risk? How to do risk management? Anything about risk? Can you show kind of see show of hands just to understand how many of you know about risk? Okay, we have one, two, three. Okay, quite less. So, I mean, I thought that would have been the majority of the case. So, apologies if I am kind of taking you through things that you know already know. But let me kind of take you through and quick understanding of what is risk and how a couple of things that you should know about risk. Okay, so what is risk? So there are many definitions related to risk. Different organizations interpret risk in different ways. Since I'm from ISACA and CMMI, the Capability Maturity Model Institute is one of our subsidiaries. Particularly, I thought of taking the definitions that we already have. So ISACA defines risk as a combination of the likelihood of an event and its impact. So I have bold some words. So these are more of the key words of these definitions. So they are talking about likelihood. So we have to know, okay, what likelihood is, right? So I believe you all know what likelihood is. Okay, that's basically how often this can happen, the frequency of occurrence, we all also call it. So likelihood is that. At the same time, impact. It doesn't matter, okay, I mean, we know for sure, okay, tomorrow sun will rise, then uh, certain things, right? The earth is rotating and all of these things, right? So I mean there is a likelihood, okay, we know, okay, every 24 hours or so, okay, we can see this and that, and there's the sun rising and birds chirping and all of these things. There's a likelihood. And the same time, okay, there is a likelihood, okay, I might get blasted by my parent or my lecturer or my who knows, okay, my boyfriend girlfriend will kiss me today. So there are likelihood, right? So but all of that, considering all of these things, you have to think of, okay, what would be the impact? Okay, just imagine, we'll take the example of rising of sun. So I mean, what would be the impact if it doesn't happen tomorrow? Would that be something that stop us continuing our business? Would that impact us not going to campus tomorrow? Or whether does that impact for me maybe doing a particular work tomorrow? So that's basically, you have to think from both combination of likelihood and impact. We'll talk little more about this towards couple of slides, uh, next couple of slides. And when the CMMI defines risk, they think it as a potential uncertain event that may be harmful or may negatively impact objective achievement. Potential uncertain event. What would be one of the uncertain events that we can take as example? Just imagine, so I'm conducting this session. I'm not expecting my laptop to fail today, or my internet connections to go off, or maybe the telecom company to cut my line, or so and so forth, right? So but there is a potential, right? There is there can be a possibility that my laptop will go off, or maybe the internet line will go off, or something happened to my internet line, or maybe we don't know, right? So these days, sometimes electricity will also go off. So if any of those happens, what will happen? So it's more of an event which will be harmful. Or it's basically, in this particular case scenario, it's not harmful, but it negatively impacts the objective of achievement, right? So I'm trying to conduct a lecture like for next 2-3 hours, and now I have uncertain event occurred, which is for failing of my laptop, or no power, no internet, or so and so forth. So that's also a risk. So how often, I mean, how often that could happen, and what is the impact? That's what we need to really look into. So when it comes to risk, there are multiple definitions, but when it comes to different interpretation, people can interpret in different ways. But just take these two as examples, just understand these keywords. Isaka talks about combination of likelihood of an event and its impact. And CMMI also talks about uncertainty, which will negatively impact the objective achievement. Okay, so what do we know? What do you want to know about more about risk? Okay, there are different types of risk. So we have operational risk, financial risk, strategic risk, compliance risk, or reputational risk. So what are operational risk? So it's basically more of like, okay, we just talked about examples. So this is an operation, right? The university has given myself the opportunity, or maybe a duty, to conduct a lecture. So if something happens, then basically this operation would not, I mean, there is operational risk. And there is a financial risk. Okay, if something happens, then there is a financial impact on that particular event. And then there can be a strategic risk. So potentially it's limit the ability to execute the strategies, achieve objectives, and make decisions, all of that. And the fourth one is compliance risk. So potentially, if I'm liable to do something during that particular time, so follow, I mean, if I'm not being able to conduct that activity, I might be caught as a non-compliant. So compliance risk also there. And at the same time, just imagine, okay, all of these things has happened, and then, okay, next day when I come, so nobody will turn up because, okay, we have turned up last week and there was no lecture. So there is a reputational risk also. So you have to think of all of these areas, so operational, financial, strategic, compliance, or reputational. So that those are types of risk. So now we have understanding. There is a different type of definitions for the risk, and we just understood what are the types of risk. And when we understand the types of risk, then there needs to be some way of do the risk. Okay, before come to that. So basically, when it comes to risk, so then we need to understand, okay, how to more of assess this risk. So what would be the mechanism to assess the risk? So what I believe you can see my screen. So in this screen, so you can see in the left hand side, you have likelihood. And on the right hand, so on the top, you have consequences, or maybe as per our definition, impact, right? So just have a clean look onto this, then you will notice there are certain things. Likelihood, they have defined into 5 different areas. Sorry. So likelihood, they have defined into 5 different categories. So rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain. I believe you understand the meaning of these words, right? So rare means, okay, yeah, it's very, very what do you call, it's like, okay, what happened to us in 2004? I don't know whether any one of you were alive that by that time. Basically, we had a tsunami, right? So in 2004, I mean, you may have heard of it, but afterward, did we had any tsunamis? No, it was a very rare situation. I mean, it was mostly unlikely. and then unlikely. So I mean, it might not happen. I mean, we can say, okay, it might not happen. So if somebody comes and tell you, okay, tomorrow it will be raining. So in current days, okay, you might say, oh, likely. But if it was about 2 3 months back, okay, we would say, okay, no, I mean, it was almost sunny all throughout last couple of weeks, so I don't think that there will be rain, right? So unlikely. And then the possible. So there is a possibility, right? And then likely. So that is again another category. And almost certain. What does that mean? That means we are sure that it will definitely happen in that way. It will occur. So these are not comprehensively things that, okay, you would do. Or I mean, you don't have to follow this kind of categorization, but I mean, it's basically you can follow your own way of categorization. Someone would ask, okay, how would I categorize likelihood? I might say, okay, you can categorize it based on your uh, feeling, whether it happens or not happens. So uh, you are sure that it will happen, so that is 5. You are sure that it will not happen, that is 1. So you are not sure whether that will happen or not, so that is 50%. You are in the middle, right? So likewise, so I mean, there are different ways of categorizing likelihood as well. So the other part of this is consequence, or else we call it impact. So impact can be different, I mean, differently categorized as well. So you can be insignificant, it can be minor, it can be moderate, it can be major or severe. So what if we take an example? So particularly, if you take just imagine, okay, we are expecting rain tomorrow, right? But we are not generating power out of rain, right? So there is a different set of people who would expect rain to generate power. But for us, okay, even if it is raining tomorrow, okay, most probably I might have to carry an umbrella and kind of go wherever I go. So the impact I will have, I might it might be lesser. But just imagine, okay, I'm going to organize a cricket tournament tomorrow as University of Javadhanpura, I might have outdoor activity. But as the organizer, if it is going to be rain tomorrow, okay, how critical it is? What would be your answer? So if you are the one who's organizing this outdoor activity, how would you rate your expectation, the impact of the rain tomorrow, whether it's insignificant, minor, moderate, major, or severe? What is your thinking? Just put it into the chat if you think it's insignificant, minor, moderate, major, or severe. Just imagine you are the organizer of the outdoor activity, and there is a possibility of raining tomorrow. So how would that impact you? Anyone would like to give me some hints? Is it insignificant, minor, moderate, major, or severe? Okay, we have a answer. Severe. I think ideally send it to everyone so everyone can see what's the perspective of others as well. Okay, is that all? Okay. That again will depend, right? So just imagine, so we have a activity outdoor, but we have sufficient tents available, or maybe we have a backup plan where we have reserved the nearby location, the indoor whatever the stadium or so, and we have a backup plan to kind of conduct certain activities and so on and so forth. So I mean, if it is so, then you can kind of deviate from the severe and kind of bring it to kind of moderate consequences, right? So you're not going to cancel the event, you're going to somehow get it done. So I know, so my kid is going for basketball practice in somewhere in Timrigasaya. So they have a outdoor court, but in case of rain, they have a small area which is dedicated for indoor training and so on and so forth. They have a different activities planned. So in case of rain, so they simply take the kids into that area and kind of continue the training. So irrespective of whether there's a rain or not, the training goes on. So likewise, there are different mechanisms, different ways of assessing risk and taking actions. So here what you can see is, so this chart, the coloring that is being used, this low, medium, high, very high, so these categories and all of these things, these all things can be defined by yourself. I mean, if you're really looking into becoming an IAS auditor, you can kind of define this according to your appetite and how you would like to see, and the same time how you would like to present this to your management and so on and so forth. So this is just a guideline I'm just providing you, so it can be likelihood and impact, and the same time this categorization could have been like this. And as I indicated, so there are different ways of treating these risk as well, right? So I mean, again, impact high and low, right? So those are the different ways of looking at it. And the same time, how critical or maybe how exploitable these things, so how less exploitable these things are. So the based on that kind of decisions, there are 4 different ways of handling risk. So particularly there are 4 main ways of handling it. One is you can simply accept the risk. So if the impact is low and exploitability is also low, you can simply accept the risk. Just imagine in my case, I mean, we took the example of me conducting this lecture, right? So we were talking about different scenarios. The light goes off, the internet goes off, my line is cut, or maybe my laptop is going to fail, and so on and so forth. So I mean, if the light goes off, okay, basically if I have some other backups or so and so forth, or even if I have sufficient amount of battery in my laptop, even though light goes off, I will not have a major impact, right? And the same time, less exploitable. That means, okay, I mean, it could have been a very rare situation where somebody would come and kind of hit my light pole, or maybe cut my line from there, right? So simply, if it is low impact, low exploitability, we always looking to accept the risks. And the same time, if the impact is low, but it is highly exploitable. um, what can we take as example? Yeah, okay, just imagine, okay, you have a laptop. I mean, just this same laptop, if your laptop is not having a proper virus guard, or maybe endpoint protection, then again you might not have a major impact on delivering the program, but there is, I mean, it is more of highly exploitable. Someone would take over my laptop and kind of start doing his own gimmicks. I remember some time back your Javedhanapura Facebook page was like that, right? So somebody else has hacked it and kind of put some content into it, and so on and so forth. The impact would be lesser because from different perspectives, I'm talking. So from the public perspective, okay, they might laugh at it and kind of do it. But if you look at from the students' perspective, okay, we are not relying on the Facebook to kind of get the messages and so on and so forth, but it's highly exploitable. So how we can, so such kind of things we can mitigate, and we have to mitigate, right? So then we have to use some mechanism to block the other people from joining to these Facebook pages and all of these things. Right. And the other side, if the impact is high and still the exploitability is high, just imagine if you know, okay, that is the public facing page of Sri Javedhanapura, and there are hundreds of thousands of people who are on the page. Or just imagine that the same thing happens to Bhati and Santosh, or maybe any one of your singers or any party. So if that happens to them, the impact is very high, right? Because they are dependent on the Facebook page, and they all put all the messages to their fans and everything into that page. So that, I mean, whenever something happens, so there is a high impact. So in that particular, in such a scenario, simply you can do 2 things. Either you should not have a page. Okay, then when they someone, okay, I will only maintain Instagram and YouTube. or maybe just YouTube to share my all my details. I'm not going to have a Facebook page because it's highly exploitable and there is a high impact. So I'm not going to have a Facebook page. But in the same time, there is a high impact and low exploitability. We can look at there is a impact is high but low exploitable. Just imagine, okay, one of the things I would take the example as life insurance, right? Insurance for your vehicle. Okay, if you have a vehicle or else, okay, your life insurance. So we just take life insurance because if something happens to our life or something happens to me, okay, there is a high impact to our families and my kids and wife and all of these people. But I believe, okay, I would drive safely and try not do safe, basically live healthy life and so on and so forth. So what I could do is, okay, I can transfer this. So I can take insurance and kind of transfer that risk of my death also to our insurance. At the same time, okay, if you take example of a car, so there is a high impact if it is kind of someone going to crash it, right? Then the option is transfer. So there are different ways of doing this treatment. So since the topic today is not about risks, I'm just trying to give you a little bit of understanding about risks as before we come to the course, today's module. Okay, and next thing is risk management. So this is more of the ISO 31000 risk management process. You can see in this particular scenario. So we are looking at communication and consultation, monitoring and review, and recording and reporting. All of these are involved. And inside the risk, you can see you have to identify the scope, context, criteria, and simply you have to go through a risk assessment process, which includes risk identification, risk analysis. Again, risk analysis is based on the likelihood, consequence, also impact, compute level of risk, and risk evaluation, and finally risk treatment. So we just talked about 4 different types of risk treatment. So you have to think of all of these areas when you go into risk management. So today's lesson is more of related to risk based audit planning. So now you understand what risk is, and the same time now we are going to talk about audit planning. So we already talked about audit and so on and so forth in the previous day, so that we are going to look into how we can do this, right? So risk-based audit planning. So when it comes to audit universe, you should encompass all relevant business processes, ideally listing all of those eligible for audit consideration, thus representing the enterprise blueprint. So what does that mean? So simply, we usually call it a business impact analysis. So you can simply looking into all the relevant business processes. So if you are into information systems audit, you look into all the information systems. First of all, you take down all the systems that is need to be audited, and the same time you looked at who are the users who use these systems, and the same time, okay, who administers them, and what kind of software is being used, and all of these things you will have to look into. And the same time you will have to look into, okay, how and what impact it has if it is goes out to the business, and the same time, okay, which has access to the outside the organization and their customers, the suppliers, vendors, and all of these things. When it comes to that, again, we can have 2 different types of audits. One we call short-term audit. So when it comes to short-term audit, so basically you consider an audit issues that will cover during a particular time period. It can be in here it is mentioned as a year, but typically you can take it as a biannual, that is 6 months year, 6 months time, or more of quarterly, every 3 months you have to do some audits and so on and so forth. But on the other hand side, the long term. So particularly when if you look into considering the holistic view of the organization, you will have to look into, okay, how and what needs to do to take care of certain changes. So for example, nowadays, I mean, very recently, Sri Lanka introduced a Personal Data Protection Act, and there are going to be a Cyber Security Act very soon. And the same time, there were changes to the Electronic Transaction Act, and the same time certain other changes to the banking. Very recently, there was a change to the Banking Act, and so on and so forth. So when you looked into all of these areas, so you might have to do a long term, considering audit, considering a long term. Okay, so example, rating reputation. So here you can see they have given some reputation rating. So you can see all of these things are examples when it comes to these different types of ratings and the categorizations and all of these things. Why I am kind of emphasizing this is particularly you have to do these things based on remember when we talked about the audit previous IS audits, you are responsible for different audit different stakeholders, starting from the board of directors down to the users. There can be different layers of uh, reporting. So based on the reports that you are going to develop, or based on the reporting, the based on the requirements that you have in hand, you will have to identify what kind of ratings, what kind of categorization I must do to make sure that I do a proper reporting at the end of the day. So, so when it comes to the next part, so basically, you have to think of the individual audit assignments. So when it comes to these audit assignments, you have to consider simply three things. One is result of the periodic risk assessments, and two is changes in the application of technology. So I mean, this is pretty imminent, right? So when it comes to technology, technology evolves rapidly. So if the change, the things that was not there about a year back, uh, just imagine your lecturers and your professors. They were never worried about someone just get things written by a computer, right? Because there were no such systems readily available for students those days. But after Gen AI, this Chat GPT, um, OpenAI has introduced it. Then on top of that, there were a lot of people trying to get into Gemini, their cloud AI or Copilot. All of these things came into picture. Right now, everybody has to worry about, okay, if I am going to give 3,000 to write article or assessment, which is about 3,000 words or 5,000 words, so and so forth. Simply, you can get it written by written by these engines, right? So now you have to think of different changes in these applications of technology. So similarly, as auditors, you have to think of all of these things. So knowing what is to be expected and what to be expected in near future would be ideal for an auditor. And then evolving privacy issues and regulatory requirement. I mean, that's why most of the time, almost all the time, so I start talking about different acts in place which is going to come, and what kind of enactment is currently there, what was changed when. So I mean, knowing this information is very important for an auditor. So that's why we need to consider all of these things. Right. So next is audit planning as an IS auditor. So what to be done when it comes to audit planning as an auditor? So you can see here there are a couple of steps. So first of all, gain an understanding of enterprise mission, objectives, purposes, and processes. This is all about blueprints. Remember, at the a couple of slides back, I was talking about you have to understand the holistic perspective of the organization. So if you don't understand the mission, objectives, purposes, and processes, you wouldn't know what to be audited. So number one, you have to thoroughly go through the organization's mission, objective, purpose, and processes. Then understand changes in the business environment of the auditee. So what does that mean? So just imagine, I just told you a couple of days back, the Banking Act changed, right? So there are certain things changed in that particular document. So if I'm auditing information system of a bank, I should understand what has changed. If I don't know what's there in the new amendment or the new act, I would not know what to expect by the what changes to be expected in the business environment. They might do something today, but it might not align with the business. I mean, basically the recent Banking Act. So you have to do kind of come up with a recommendation. Okay, this is not how you should do it. You should do it differently. That is recommended by the Banking Act. So and so forth. And on top of that, review prior work papers. So it's very important if there is any prior work papers on audits and any recommendations, any other reports. Maybe there are people who would do implementation reviews, audit reviews, or maybe validations. All of these information, you better collect all of these things and review prior to prior work. And then identify stated content such as policies, standard, and required guidelines, procedures, and the organization structure. So each organization, as far as I'm concerned, each organization is unique. It can be two different banks. Just imagine if one can be Sampa Bank, another one is NDB Bank. Both of them are in the same business. They are commercial licensed banks, and both of them have almost similar amount of asset base, similar amount of customers, and all those things. And they may also have the same similar organization structure and so on and so forth. But the policies and standard would can be different. Why? One is a development bank, other one is just a investment bank, or basically a local bank. So how they operate, how the policies inside the, if you go to, I mean, I'll take example. If you want to go get a personal loan from either Sampak Bank or NDB, sometimes NDB may be more lenient on it, but Sampak would have been very strict on it for the same person, same customer. Why? Because of their appetite, because of their internal policies and standards. And then set the audit scope and audit objective. Remember, we talked about audit charter last week, right? So it needs to include all of this information, remember? So when you're planning, you have to make sure, okay, you are developing audit approach or the strategy, and the same time different other things like understanding the scope and all of those things. And then address engagement logistics. Remember last time we were talking about we can get specialists, we can take external auditors, and so on and so forth, right? So it's very important to understand all of these things at the planning stage. And next, the identify opportunity for continuous audit or audit automation using computer-assisted audit tools. Remember, we were talking about computer-assisted audit tools. So it's all about bringing in whatever the required information, whatever the required resources and tools into one particular place before you start anything. Okay. So on top of that, as I always highlighting, if there is an effect of laws and regulations on information system audit planning. So there are basically each organization must comply with either one or many government or external requirements. If you take, I mean, I will take example as banks. Banks has to adhere to the government policies, and their regulator is Central Bank of Sri Lanka, so they have to adhere to the activity, basically directions given by the bank. And the same time, you may have heard of there are different ratings available for banks, right? So they might have, I mean, just take a Fitch rating, or there are different other different ratings they might rate these banks. You may have seen, I mean, there is a triple A, triple A minus, triple B minus, double B plus, different ratings, right? So you have to understand all of these things. I mean, you have to identify what basically what requirements or practices or controls that they have to adhere to when it comes to compliance with any of these places. And next is assurance that enterprise direction and intent align to the enterprise security posture. So, I mean, I'll tell you something. Basically, when it comes to Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan banks are yet to adopt cloud. I mean, that's more of very unfortunate in a way. But if you look at different uh, uh, basically banks, they are not fully on cloud because they are reluctant to go on cloud. They're still on their private cloud, or maybe they have their own data centers and so on and so forth, because there are directions which kind of collide with the intent of the organizations. There are directions which might say, okay, you have to make sure, okay, you have to take care of this information, this set of application, this and that and that. Again, they might kind of rely on these directions, and they might not fully looked into getting into a kind of a controversial place, because they always look into their security exposure. They always look into, okay, if I go cloud, okay, we don't have an idea, we don't have an assurance whether I have the similar securities like what we have in data center. So likewise, there are some disagreements, some misconceptions. So, but one of the duties of information systems auditor is to kind of assure that the enterprise directions and intent are aligned to the enterprise security posture, right? And then structured approaches to implement a security program. So that's also part of the planning. And then the confidence that adequate and effective information security will protect valuable assets. So remember, we were talking about different stakeholders and different levels of reporting and so on and so forth. For each level, you have to make sure you assure that adequate and effective information security protection is available. So how are we going to determine the compliance? So basically, this is more of, okay, how you would look into it. So one way of determining the compliance would be, okay, you have to first document applicable laws and regulations, then assess if enterprise and IT have considered external requirements, and then review internal IT department function activity documents, address adherence to law applicable to the industry, because different industries will have different laws, right? So, I mean, certain laws which is related to the banks may not be directly related to the financial sector, or maybe it's not related to the insurance. They might not related to tourism and hospitality. So likewise, so you have to make sure these changes, these relevant reviews has been done. And then the determine adherence to established procedures that address these requirements. So that's very important. So you have to make sure there is a set of procedures, established procedures that would address these requirements. And finally, determine if there are procedures to ensure contracts or agreements with external IT service providers reflect any legal requirements. So it's very important that there are procedures to ensure contracts and or agreements with external people as well, right? So you might not be complying all of these internally. Just take an example. So I need to have a data center. I'm a bank, right? But I know if I'm going to maintain a data center, I would have to buy a place, then have racks, then equipment, network equipment, the server equipment, everything we have to put there. And then we have to put air conditioning, then we have to put people, different power sources like uh, generators and so on and so forth, and fire control, fire distinguishing equipment, everything. And the same time, then every day morning, so I will have to get up and kind of make sure that these things are running right before the workday starts, right? So in such instance, I might think, okay, why should I have a data center of my own, which kind of reduce the amount of time I have to sleep myself? So I would go for some data center provider. I would go for Dialog data center, or maybe I might go for Sri Lanka Telecom data center, or maybe some other telco data center. So likewise, so simply in such cases, I have to make sure that I have contracts which comply with the regulatory requirements. So there, just imagine, so there is a requirement where this particular data center needs to be audited every quarter. So it's okay, okay, I don't have a data center internally, so I can't kind of dust my hands, because there is a data center that I'm using for my organization. So I have to make sure that I have an agreement with that data center that, okay, they should conduct a audit every quarter. So if they have not done it, then automatically I am become non-compliant. So likewise, there are things that we have to think of. So you can make sure that, okay, you know what applicable laws and all of these things, and on top of that, you have to make sure the procedures are in place. At the same time, you can look into whether internally whether I'm adhering to these things, or else I have to make sure if I use any external parties, those parties adhere to what I supposed to be adhered to, along to be compliant with the laws and regulations. Okay, so what should we identify as IS auditors? So when it comes to IS auditor, we have to identify a couple of things which goes on to other places. So one would be extra electronic data, personal data, copyrights, e-commerce, e-signatures, and etc. And then information security, or basically information system practice, security practices, and controls. And then the way computers, programs, and data are stored. So there are different ways of storing data, right? So, and each data, well, different data would have different values of time, right? So how these things are stored, and then the organization know activities of information technology services, and finally the audits. So you have to identify all of these things while you are planning for it, right? Okay, so now we come into, okay, what would be the approach? There are 5 steps. I mean, this is not particularly showing you, okay, these are the 5 steps that you have to follow, but basically, at least you have to follow these 5 steps. Number one, gather information and plan. Number two, obtain understanding of internal controls. Number three, perform compliance tests. So I believe you understand compliance, right? And number four, perform substantive tests. And number five, conclude the audit. So these are very high level 5 different steps that you have at the approach. And if I'm to kind of give a little bit of more picture and what kind of activities it has, different approach. So remember 5 steps. Okay, take 2 minutes and kind of read through this slide and try to understand what are the different types of activities. So what are the examples for different uh, steps of this audit approach? Okay, right. So if I'm to kind of move from here. So basically, I believe you would have gone through the list. So this is not a comprehensive list. I mean, this is some activities that must come into these different steps of the approach. But when you plan for it, you have to, in minimal, have at least these things. On top of that, there can be a lot of things there. Well, audit risks. So when it comes to audit risks, there are different type of audit risks available. So you have there is overall audit risk, there's a control risk, inherent risk, and detection risk. So what are these things? So if you look at, I mean, let's look at from the bottom, detection risk. So risk that material errors or misstatements will not be detected by auditor. So, particular, there can be certain errors or misstatements that IS auditor might not detect. For example, okay, we are using subject matter experts, we are using external auditors, we are kind of rely on interviews of the people, we rely on observations, and so on and so forth, right? So there can be certain things which I might have missed. Just imagine, okay, okay, I'll tell you, I tell you a kind of a story. Sometime back, this is a conversation that we had I mean, one of my friends had with me almost about a decade ago. He used to work for Port Authority as a systems engineer. And they have noticed there is a particular switch which goes off daily at particular intervals. It was not that there was, I mean, remember I talked about likelihood and impact. Uh, the likelihood was there, so they know, okay, at this particular time, it might go off, but simply there is very less impact. Because of that, it was not prioritized. So what has happened? So this was happening regularly. So whenever time permits, they go and check what is there is any issue with the switch, and so on. So they even kind of swap the switches from one to another, and so on and so forth. But still, they couldn't recognize what is the issue. So there is a significant frequency where it goes down and automatically it gets up, right? So what they decided was, okay, sometimes after, because it is not recognizable, they simply had a person to sit there and observe the switch, some engineer to observe. You know what has happened? So basically, this was one of the minor impact switches where it provides Wi-Fi to a particular area. But they noticed uh, a person, basically one of the peons or cleaning staff, they come and just remove the plug of that particular network board, basically network box, and kind of plug the but they just simply plug the water heater into it. Whenever they want to kind of have a tea and so on and so forth, just simply remove the switch network boxes power connection, and use that to kind of heat the water, right? That was, I mean, just imagine if you are an auditor and a similar scenario is being happening. So you have to ideally have to be there at that particular instance, right? If otherwise you will not detect that, right? You will not identify that there is a risk of power going off on this particular um, switch because of this, right? So next is inherent risk. So when it comes to the inherent risk, the risk level or exposure of process to be audited without considering controls that management has implemented exist independent of an audit and can occur because of the nature of the business. So inherent risk are there because it particularly the exposure of the process uh, needs, I mean, basically to be audited without considering controls that management has implemented. So those things are inherent. So inherent means, just imagine, okay, just imagine something like that. Okay, it's something, I mean, if I mean, more of an assumption here. So basically, if you have parents who has blood pressure or diabetic, so it is, doctors are always saying, okay, the elder kid may have blood pressure, either blood pressure and or diabetics, right? So that is an inherent risk. So you are, I mean, irrespective of what is being kind of what is being practiced, okay, you may have a healthy lifestyle, you may not eat sugar, you will not you have any other unhealthy food and so and so, but genetically you inherit some amount of risk of becoming a diabetic, right? So similarly, systems, organizations will have a similar inherent risk as well. And then the control risk, the risk that material errors exist that would not be prevented or detected on timely basis. Risk of manual review of computer log. So there can be certain things which is kind of would not be prevented or detected on timely basis because of different controls that is being put forward into that. And considering all of these things, so overall there is a risk. Why? Because audit is usually is not a comprehensive observation or review of anything. It's more of you are taking a sample and you do a sample audit, right? So it's very difficult for someone to kind of do comprehensive audits regularly. But just imagine, every year or maybe every 3 years time you might do a comprehensive audit, but regularly you would not do go for it. So as a overall, you might have audit risk, right? The audit assessments. So how would you assess the audit? So it's more of, here you can see it's 4-step process. So number one, identify, quantify, and prioritize risk against the criteria for risk acceptance and objectives. And number two, guide and determine appropriate management actions and priorities. Number four, perform periodic to address changes in the environment, security requirements, and risk landscape. And number four, management, not the information systems auditor, is responsible for risk assessment process. So simply, when it comes to audits, you have to think of all of these things. Remember, we were just simply talked about the risk management process. So risk assessment is one of the major areas. If I'm to take you back to that diagram here, so you can see risk assessment includes a quite a substantial part of your work, right? So you have to identify, you have to analyze and evaluate. So that's all of this includes inside risk assessment. And the same time, you have to rely on the communication and the consultation. And the same time, so you have to get the monitoring and review, and also recording and reporting information into it. Okay. So similarly, IS audit risk assessment techniques. There are different techniques that can be used as I indicated. So I'm not going to go through this once again. So remember, I was talking about uh, this particular chart. So here. So you can build a similar chart like this based on the likelihood and impact, and kind of have a categorization overall, and kind of build your own appetite into it, and kind of assess the risk accordingly. Right. So risk analysis. Risk analysis, what we just talked about, risk assessment. So risk analysis is part of the assessment. So that's what it's mentioned here. The risk analysis is a subset of risk assessment, and during audit planning to help identify risk and vulnerabilities. So an IS auditor can determine the controls needs to mitigate risk. Okay, so if I am to evaluate a business process, what should we do? So, I mean, we just talked about analyzing and all of these things, right? So how would you evaluate IT business process? Right. So next is about that. So evaluating IT business process. So simply, it must be able to identify and differentiate these risk types, and controls used to mitigate risk. Then second, evaluate the risk assessment and management process and techniques used by the business managers, and should have the knowledge of common business risk areas related to risk and relevant controls. Understand the risk exists within the audit process itself. So all of what we just talked about, right? So from here onwards, we are talking about short term or long term. So we're talking about audit assessment. So we're talking about planning. So we talked about laws and regulations. We talked about compliance. Uh, we talked about approach, different approaches and risks, and then the assessment, then the techniques and the analytics. So when you are evaluating IT business process, you have to think of all of these things. Okay. So we have a quick question. Uh, so there's a small activity. Just let's go through this and let's see who can answer. So simply a small activity. So you have been assigned to an integrated audit of payroll processes and need to plan the IT audit portion of the engagement. So what is your duty? You need to plan the IT audit portion of the engagement. What is the most important business process area that you need to consider? That's number one. What is the most important business process area that you need to consider? So what is your duty? You need to plan the IT audit portion. And then they're asking what is the most important business process area that you need to consider. And to help you perform the audit, would it be better to know IS audit budget or to know CIO CFO risk profile for payroll processor? To help you perform the audit, would it be better to know IS audit budget or to know CIO, CFO's risk profile for payroll processor? So you simply have two questions, right? So anyone just type your, just think about this and type your answer in the chat. I'll give you about 5 minutes. Just think about this and see whether you can answer this. Okay, let's look at the first question. What is the most important business process area that you need to consider? Okay, so what is our duty? This is our duty is, okay, you've been assigned to integrated audit of payroll So just identify the payroll process, and need to plan the IT audit portion of the engagement. So most important business process area that you need to consider. Particularly, the question answer for the first one is business processes surrounding the business payroll process. For example, different organization does the payroll in different way, right? So, I mean, certain organization does it as a part of internal uh, finance, or maybe management finance team, or the accounting team, or maybe it can be part of the human resource or people culture and growth team, or maybe based on the company, they might be using an external party to conduct this. So particularly what is the most important business process area? So you have to understand the holistic perspective of the business process surrounding the payroll process. So that is what you need to understand. So number two, to help perform this audit, would it better know IS audit budget or to know CIO and CFO risk profile for payroll? So yes, I believe I have got more of answers. Definitely, CIO and CFO risk profile for payroll processes are important. Why? Because if you know the business processes surrounding this, and you need to audit that, rather knowing the basically the knowing the IS audit budget, you have to understand the CIO, CFO risk profile. Why? Because IS audit budget doesn't mean anything for us when it comes to the impact into the business process, right? But if I know what is the risk profile of CIO or CFO for payroll process, so I would look into it. So I have one person answering CIO, CFO risk profile. Yes, correct. But the other person, so it's not the IS audit budget. It doesn't matter, okay, what is the budget related to IS audit. If you I mean, it can be one person doing. I mean, you may be a junior person who would do this particular audit, right? Then it doesn't matter what is the budget is. So you being assigned to do so. So you might go through it, kind of understand it, and then document the process. If there's a document, you might review the process, understand what are the activities going on there, and so forth, and then simply you will report it back and say, this is how it works, and this is the audit risk available. Okay, thank you. And the next question, this is more of a MCQ question. Just, okay, first of all, read the question and try to answer. So there are four options. So I think, let me change this to ABCD. Okay, here. Okay, now you can answer. So particularly, due to resource constraints of the IS audit team, the audit plan as originally approved cannot be completed. Assuming that the situation is communicated in the audit report, which course of action is most applicable? Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes. Just read this, and I want all of you to send me the answer, whether it's A, B, C, or D. So we have 35 people. I would expect 35 answers. Shall we start? I'll give you 3 minutes. Okay, sorry, I was talking on my mute. So most of the people have answered C. So let's have a look into the definition of C. So more of, again, if I look at the question, due to resource constraint of the IS audit team, the audit plan is as originally approved cannot be completed. So where are we? So now there is a audit plan which is approved by the board of directors. And now, because certain people have left my team, so I can't conduct the same quality audit, right? That's the situation. And then, assuming the situation is communicated in audit report, so I am going to report this to back to the management. Okay, because of the resource constraints, I will not be able to do this as agreed. So, which course of action is most acceptable? So now you are the auditor, right? So you are talking about focus on auditing high risk areas. So now high risk areas. So, particularly confirming compliance with technological standards is not, I mean, basically high risk areas are not that, I mean, we are not worried about that mostly, right? Because you have to look into this holistically. I mean, if you are an audit, uh, internal auditor or information systems auditor, just focusing on high risk areas would not be sufficient. Why? There can be certain low risk areas, but still you need to make sure your audit is balanced. Otherwise, what will happen? I mean, you are just focusing on high risk areas, or there can be medium risk and the low risk areas, which could kind of coming to high risk areas at the later stage. So as far as the question concerns, so simply focusing on high risk areas would not be sufficient. So in my case, in this particular case, answer C is out. You have to be more broader than that, because I mean, if you are just to think, okay, high risk, okay, just focus on high risk. Okay, come here. Again, let's do the high risk audit on high risk areas. We'll forget about the medium and low risk, and we'll forget about it. Remember, you define the audit. I mean, you define the audit charter, you identified the business risk, and you identified the plan, and you are the one who did all of these things, and now you are only focusing on one particular area. And then that basically taking, okay, what happens to your plan? So because of some people left my team, I am simply going to drop the medium and low risks of my own plan. Right. So answer C is not correct. So now you have three more options. Just think from that angle once again. You have to think broadly, because this plan is yours and you have already communicated that to the management, and you have option to do another audit sometime after. And thinking all of this, I'll give you 2 minutes more. Just think of, okay, I out of A, B, and C, D, what would be the ideal answer in this case? Okay, I'm telling you, answer C is not correct. Okay, now I'm getting a lot of B's. Again, right? Okay, I'll tell you something on that as well. That is, answer B is test the operational effectiveness of controls. So, would that be sufficient? I mean, if I'm to just look into the controls, effectiveness of the controls, I mean, my duty is not to kind of, I mean, I'm not, I'm not the, what do you call, efficiency person, right? So I'm just the information systems auditor, and operational effectiveness of controls. I might not have taken all the controls into the picture and so on. So again, remember, you have to think broader than that. So because this plan is yours, you define the team, You brought in external people, you brought in tools, you brought everything, and now team has gone out, and now you have to think differently. Okay, rather kind of stressing you more. So particularly in this particular phase, answer is A. Why A? You have to make sure it doesn't matter whether you lost the team or whatever happens, and you have to make sure adequacy of the control design. So you have to make sure test the adequacy of the control design. So most appropriate thing to do is you have to make sure that you test the adequacy of the control. So what is adequacy? Adequacy is whether the controls design is sufficient. So before you come to the effectiveness of the controls, before that, you have to make sure whether the design of control is adequate. Before you rely on management testing of controls, you have to identify whether the controls design is sufficient. Before you focus on auditing high risk areas, you have to think whether all of these things are adequate. So, I mean, B, C, D. That's why I told you at the very first day. I mean, there are things. I mean, it's tempting for us to answer certain things. Okay, simply okay. We'll focus on high risk areas. Okay, that's done. Then simply we will look at the effectiveness of the control. So simply that is the case. But if we are to test the operational effectiveness of the controls, focus on highest risk areas, or even rely on management testing controls. All of these controls, before it comes to the controls, you have to understand whether they are adequate, right? So that's why, as the auditor, the most appropriate action is to first take, first to understand whether this is adequate. Okay, next. So we are moving into the next part of this. So we already talked about different, I mean, basically we understand the adequacy, I mean, controls are important, right? Controls and considerations. Okay, since it's 6:20, let's take a quick break, maybe 15 minutes. So we'll come back at 6:35 to continue with the rest. Okay. So where we were? So we are here, right? So types of controls and considerations. So when it comes to types of controls, so we have to look into, so every uh, organization, each organization has different type of controls in place and considerations in place. So because there are different type of businesses, there are different type of activities happening, the unique natures are there, and different levels of stakeholders and different budgets and all of these things, right? So because of that, every enterprise has controls in place, and these controls, the effectiveness of controls are there to look into different aspects. It can be preventing certain actions or preventing certain things from happening, and there can be controls that detects things, and there can be controls which kind of try to contain incidents and maybe enable recovery from an risk event. At the same time, the enterprises basically design, develop, implement, and monitor information systems through what? We just simply talked about policies, procedures, practices, and organizational structures, right? So particularly enterprises design, develop, and implement and monitor the information systems based on these areas, these things. Remember that. So almost all the time. So first of all, we have to give more of a what do you call, more of a um, uh, biasness, or maybe more of importance for their industry, particularly first of all the constitution of the country, on top of that the laws, and then particularly to their regulators. So if you are a bank, your regulator is Central Bank of Sri Lanka in the context of Sri Lanka. If you are a telecom operator, you are bound by the Telecommunication Regulatory Commission. If you are a public listed company, you are regulated by the Securities Exchange Commission. So likewise, there are different regulators. And on top of that regulators, remember we were talking about there can be other interested parties who are kind of looking into compliances of our organization. If it is a bank, maybe a Fitch rating. If it is something else, there can be certain other organizations who would look into it. At the same time, you have to build a set of policies based on these things, the constitution, the law, regulations, and all of that. And on top of that, you have to identify what kind of standards, maybe ISO 9000, maybe ISO 22000, or maybe ISO 27000, or maybe ISO 31000, or maybe something related to maybe payments, or maybe Swift, or PCI DSS, or particularly if you are in a different food industries, food related related standards. So likewise, there are standards that is available for your organizations, your industry. And when you consider all of these things, you have to build a set of policies. So, considering all of these things, organizations usually build policies. On top of the policies, we have to create procedures. So, based on the policies, we are building procedures, practices, guidelines to organize other things. And uh, in order to control all of these things, you may build organization structure internally. So all of these things you do is to address different type of risks by adding or creating different controls. So controls are normally composed of policies, procedures, practices, and organizations that are implemented to reduce risk to the enterprise. So why we do all of these things? It is to make sure that we reduce the impact on our organization, right? So that's how it will happen. So when it comes to these controls, so there will, first of all, we will look into internal controls. So we have to make sure we operate at all levels within the enterprise to mitigate the exposure to the risk level that is potentially there. So you have to prevent potential risk by occurring and make sure. Remember, we were talking about the different what do you call, different interpretations of the risk. So we have to make sure, I mean, at one particular interpretation, they were talking about mm, reducing the impact from negative impacts on achieving our business objectives, right? So simply you have to look into this. So internal controls are there to operate at all levels within the enterprise to mitigate its exposure to risks that potentially could prevent it from achieving its business objectives. So there are two key aspects of controls should be addressed. So number one, what should be achieved? Number two is what should be avoided. So whenever we are building internal control, we have to always think about these two things. Okay, are we achieving something out of this control, or are we avoiding something through this control? So let's kind of look into it. So when it comes to the control objective, so this is basically one of the interpretations of the control objective. So control objective is an objective of one or more operational areas or roles to be achieved to contribute to the fulfillment of strategic goals of the enterprise. Read it on your own. Simply, a control objective is an objective of one or more operational areas or roles to be achieved to contribute to the fulfillment of strategic goals of the enterprise. That is, the control objective is such a goal that is explicitly related to the strategy of the enterprise. So how does that work? So I managed to find a nice diagram. So this is related to the COBIT. So I mean, this is one of the frameworks we have in the world, which talks about how you operate in the enterprise structure. So the COBIT stands for Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies. So this is one of the well-known ISACA-driven framework that is being used in the industry. So you can see there we are looking at four different aspects. So we look at the business requirements, IT resources, IT processes, enterprise information. So you can see we have business requirements which drives the investment on IT resources that are used by IT processors to deliver enterprise information which responds to business requirements. So almost this cycle is almost all the time. As I mean, you don't need to be a internal information or basically information systems auditor. If you are a part of any organization, you always have to think of it. Just imagine you are the accountant. Just imagine you are the systems administrator. Just imagine you are the manager, or maybe you are an intern there. Just think of it. Okay, starting from the ID that is being given to you, or maybe your laptop given to you, or any other equipment or information provided to you, is all governed on this framework. So amount of information that I'm going to release to you as the intern has to ideally deliver to the business requirement of the organization. So if the business requirement is right, then it drives the investment in IT resources. That's why most of the places you may have seen certain set of your friends. Okay, if you have gone to internships, or if you have any friends who are currently doing internships, so certain people have never given any laptop or anything, right? At the same time, certain people are given MacBooks and very high performing laptops and all of these things. So it's all kind of relate to this framework. So if you are an organization, you are very keen about your security and bugs and security exposure, even if you are if you have interns in place. So particularly then you may be worried about having a high performing laptop with a proper what do you call operating system and endpoint protection and all of that, right? So you have to think of all of these things. So next we were already talking about next is to control measures. So what does control measures relate to? So simply, when it comes to control measures, the control measure is defined as an activity contributing to the fulfillment of control objective. So here, control measures are there to make sure that effectiveness of the control objective, or basically you will identify whether this fulfills the control objective. Remember we had that question, so it was talking about the controls that we are going to had in place, and high risk controls, the low risk controls, and so on and so forth. But ultimately you have to understand the control design, right? So if you don't have the control design right, it doesn't matter whether you do all other work right. So when it comes to control measures, you can see there are four different aspects of it. So it relates to effectiveness and efficiency of the operations, and reliability of the financial reporting, compliance with the laws and regulations, and safeguarding information assets. So each and every control, remember we were talking about two things. We need to make sure whether we are achieving something out of it or we are avoiding something. So in the same time, you have to make sure whether it relates to any of these areas. So in general control methods, so we can divide this into three different areas. So take these words into your mind. So basically just go through it. So there are three different types of controls. We have managerial or administrative controls, we have technical controls, and we have physical controls. So I'm going to give you a small exercise after this. So because of that, just kind of have a look into this. So what is a managerial control? So managerial control relates to oversight, reporting, procedures, and operations of a process. So what are technical controls? Technical controls provided through the use of technology, equipment, or devices, and require proper managerial controls to operate correctly. So you can see these technical controls are connected to managerial controls as well. And third one, the physical controls. So physically restrict access to facility or hardware, require maintenance, monitoring, and ability to address, react to alerts. Okay, once again, so three type of controls: managerial, technical, and physical. Managerial is related to the oversight, reporting procedures, and operation processes. Technical, provide through the use of technology, equipment, and devices. Physical, physically restrict access to facility or hardware. Okay, so next slide, I'm going to show you a set of controls that is in place. So you may have seen these things in your campus, or maybe if you're working, or if you go into a particular office or so. So I need all of you to kind of share me the answer. So there are about 11 controls. I want you to divide these 11 controls under managerial, technical, and physical. Okay. Once again, managerial controls related to the oversight, reporting, procedures, and operations of the process. Technical, provided through use of technology, equipment, and devices. And physical is physically restrict access to the facility or hardware. Okay, so drop me answers into the chat looking at this. So we have 11 controls. We have three different types. So if you can uh, divide this into three different areas, that would be great. So send me the answers as soon as possible. You figure that out. So we'll give about maybe 3 minutes or 4 minutes. Okay, I have few answers received, but yes, most of whom have answered is correct. So let me kind of put the answers here. Right. So I just put the answer into the chat so you can simply look into it. Let's move to the next part of this. So particularly now we are looking at you were looking at controls, and now we are going to look at control classification. So remember we were talking about controls which has different capabilities, right? So here when it comes to classification, there are different type of classification that you are looking in. You can look into. Uh, One is preventive controls. So what are preventive controls? Preventive controls are inhibit or impede attempts to violate security policies and practices. So what would be the examples for preventive controls? So just imagine encryption or user authentication or vault construction doors. So these things are basically making sure the users are not allowed to get into a particular place, right? So if it is encrypted, you can't look into information. If there's a user authentication required, so without the username and password, you can't get into it. Or if there's a multi-factor authentication, so you have to have those controls. So you have to have that multi-factor authentication available for you. Or else if it is the door, so simply without the key you can't get in, you cannot get in, right? So that's where the preventative controls are. Oh, excuse me, give me a phone. Right. And the second type of control is deterrent control. So it provides guidance or warnings that may dissolve intentional or uninterpreted attempts at compromise. So simply, deterrent controls are particularly just take example. Okay, maybe security camera, CCTV, right? So when there is a CCTV, you would be little careful on your behavior, right? So because there is a possibility that it can be recorded and it can be monitored by someone. So simply in such cases, you are going to be a little careful about it. And maybe you may have seen the warning banners. It might say, okay, these only for staff members, or maybe it might say, okay, do not enter. So something like, so the deterrent controls are more of, I mean, it's also showing you not to kind of, I mean, basically not, it's about follow this instruction. So it's particularly set of instructions that they are looking into. And third is detective control. So what is detective? What are detective controls? Detective controls are providing warnings of violations or attempted violations of security policies and practices without impeding or inhibiting these actions. So what does that mean? Simply, they might not say anything. They might just simply detect. So they might say for example, they might, if you are using any, what do you call, mm, it's more of like detection. So simply when you go into your campus internet, or maybe to a lab and so forth. So whenever you are browsing internet and so on and so forth, they would simply, rather than doing any blocking and all of that, so they may be just simply recording what sites you have gone, okay, what information you have downloaded, everything are there. I mean, they just simply keep a track of it. It's basically they will have a trail of what you are doing. So that's detective controls. And then there are certain other controls which are corrective controls. So it basically it will remediate errors, omissions, and unauthorized users and intrusions when detected. So corrective controls. So maybe examples would be backups, or maybe automated failovers. So corrective. So as soon as you detect there is a issue, or as soon as you detect there is a error, you simply will go ahead and what do you call? Will simply will go ahead and correct it. So that's how it works. And finally, the third one would be, final one would be compensating controls. Compensating controls are more of offset a weakness in control structure of enterprise. So simply, examples would be including unsecured systems, isolate network segments. So, I mean, I believe you have heard of honeypots, right? When it comes to securities and all of that. So there are honeypots. So these honeypots are particular to attract people to kind of try to hack into your organization. So in that such cases, you can simply looking to get people more attracted to those honeypots, and okay, they will simply look into it and so on and so forth. It's more of like, okay, rat traps, right? So simply, there is a rat trap. Okay, they will kind of, there will be piece of cheese or something available. So simply, what you can, what they would do is, okay, there is a trap where, okay, you make yourself vulnerable, and on top of that, you make other person to kind of try to exploit you. So that's what will happen. So similar things. So these are different type of classification. So what is the relationship between these things? So you can see here, so there are basically you can see when just take a look at this and kind of focus on the arrowheads where it links. So particularly if you look at risks, you can see risk basically informed to build a control. If there is a risk, you simply have to put a control. Either one of those cat classifications. And on top of that, whenever there is a control, it might influence the risks. Particularly, so I mean, there is a direct relationship between the risk and control that you can see, right? So there's a link between the risk and control, and almost all the time as IS auditors, you have to identify what influences the risk, and you have to understand the areas that you can use to be blocked, and kind of put controls on top of it. Okay, so I have a simple exercise once again. So uh, so you have in the left hand side a series of risks 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have controls A, B, C, D. So simply just read this and kind of put into the chat, okay, which risk is being, which risk is being controlled by which control. So you have 4 controls and 4 risks. So I might say, okay, if you prefer, sometimes you might have one risk which can be controlled by both one or two controls. You can define as such as well, but just imagine one risk can be controlled with one of the controls available here. So simply just say 1 equals A, 2 equals C, or so and so forth. So just put your preference here, which risk is being controlled by which control. So we'll take about 5 minutes and kind of try to do this. Okay, good. So I can see the answers. So I believe most of the people have got things correctly. Yeah, of course, definitely. So how would you answer this? So if you look at, I put one of the examples here. So particularly, a mobile device containing sensitive data is stolen. So for risk number one, what would be the answer? So most of the people have answered that as B. So hard drive are encrypted for endpoints. Yes, of course, that can be a control, right? So number two, accountability for user actions within a system cannot be established. So what are we talking about? Accountability for user actions. So if somebody does a delete, somebody does give access to somebody, so we have to make sure there's a control, right? So most of the people have answered C. Users are provided with unique IDs and password. Of course, then what can be done? So it's more of like a what? It's more of like a deterrent control, right? So you can identify who did what. And then we have the third one. So employee exfiltrate enterprise data to personal devices. So simply somebody may copy everything of the organization's customer list or whatever into your personal devices. So what are the controls that you can put? So most of the people have answered A. Users are required to acknowledge acceptable use policies upon hire annually. So what does that mean? So simply, so it's more of like uh, what do you call, more of like preventive control, right? So simply you are having a NDA or maybe agreement signed that okay, you are not allowed to take information out. If do so, you may be fined or you may be sued and so on and so forth. Right? So it's more of a preventive control. And fourth one, employees receive deceptive emails and divulge sensitive information. So number four. So, what does that mean? So, basically, there are a lot of things happening nowadays, right? So, people are getting into WhatsApp messages and kind of they are more. I mean, people are getting information from the WhatsApps, making sure getting the bank information, the personally identifiable information, and so on and so forth. Is that something that we can control because it's not within the corporate network, right? But people are sharing this information and most people have been exploited as well. So in order to kind of mitigate that kind of a risk, so one of the key things that we can do is train the users on applicable security threats. Okay, most of the people have got the answers right. So this is more of like first one B, second one C, third one A, and fourth one D. So I believe most of the people have got the answers correct. Great. Okay, quick question once again. So it's again a question. So it's related to how what we were looking at. So here there is a XYZ Corp is looking to bolster its IS security after a series of security breaches compromised the personal data of the thousands of customers. As an IS auditor, you have been asked by management to help determine which control objectives are more applicable. So you have three questions. One is, what is the IS audit's role in defining control objectives and when would independence be at risk? So what is the IS role in defining control objective and when would independence be at risk? And okay, let's do this. So we'll take this as a kind of a quick assignment. So, um, I will put this into the chat. Anyone who's interested, just share me the answers for this. I will respond you back. So um, you all know my email, right? So I'm putting my email here with the screenshot here. So just go through this activity and send me an email with your answers. So I will respond back to you with my comments, my feedback. Okay, great. So let's move it to the next one. So now all throughout 1.5 days, basically the last lecture and almost towards end of this lecture. So we were talking about planning. right? So we were talking about how we can plan an audit and what needs to go into the planning and what we are looking at and all of these things. The next step of the of this is execution. So now we are done with planning. So what are we going to do to execute? So what are we going to do next? So what are we going to trying to cover under this? Audit project management, audit test and sampling methods, audit evidence collection techniques, audit data analytics, uh, reporting and communication techniques, quality assurance, and improvement of audit process. So this is what we are going to talk throughout today, and more of like the first part of next week, we will be talking about this execution part, how we are going to execute. Right. So audit project management. So first of all, I think there were some questions, I received on email as well, whether we are going to talk about project management, ICT project management. No, actually not. Because ICT project management is more of related to infrastructure or application development, infrastructure system development, and all of these things, right? But here, what we are more of talking about is the audit project management. So we planned it. Audit project management is more of on top of all of that. So you have to have an understanding of a little bit of how infra project and application project management works, but it's not necessary. You can simply understand how the audit project can be managed. So that's what we are going to talk. So here, when it comes to audit project management, so the project management techniques for managing and administering audit projects, it includes particularly these 5 steps. So number one, planning and audit engagement, building the audit plan, communicating the plan, executing the plan, monitoring project activity. So, it's almost rather similar to any common project, because it's more of like planning uh, and communicating and monitoring, right? So it's almost the same. So what goes into this each step will differ based on what you're going to do, right? So planning the audit engagements, you have to plan the audit considering the project specific task. Building audit plan. Remember, we were talking about audit charter, so you have to make sure we build uh, a substantial timeline, optimizing the resource use, make realistic estimates of time requirements for each task, and communicating the plan. So we have to communicate this into different stakeholder levels, right? So uh, one set of stakeholders may be expecting reports or outcome. One set of stakeholders we may have to bring in for interviews, observations, or maybe we have to plan for different activities, because here it's very important where you get, if you're engaging external auditors, external parties, external subject matter experts, and there is a set of people who are internal, which their timelines needs to be matched. Otherwise, what will happen? Okay, the experts will come there, but if the particular person who has authority or who has access to that particular system is not available, it's basically wasting the time of both people, or maybe money as well as other things, right? So, and then the communicating the plan, adapting practical and meaningful techniques to communicate audit projects, plans, and receive buy-in from applicable stakeholders, executing the plan, and monitoring project activities. So then, when it comes to the audit project management, you have to basically looking to the audit objectives. So the specific goals the audit must accomplish are threefold. One is focus on confirming the internal control exists to minimize the business risk and function as expected. Assure compliance with legal and regulatory requirements and confidentiality, integrity, reliability, availability of information and IT resources. And then this is being translated from basic wide-ranging audit objective by identifying the control objectives and related controls that address the objectives. So These are the three key elements of project, so that you have to understand the audit objectives. And next, so the next couple of slides, we are talking about the typical audit process step by step. So when it comes to audit process, there are three things, right? So planning space, field work and documentation, and reporting. So there are a certain amount of activities that is going into the planning stage. So we'll talk further when it comes to the next slide on the planning. And second is field work and documentation. So again, we'll talk about it later. And finally, the reporting phase. So what is included in the planning? When it comes to planning, so you have to determine the audit subject. So what does mean by audit subject? So it's basically you have to identify the area to be audited. Audit subject means the area of the audited or auditor. Basically the auditee and it's their areas. And then the define audit objective. Identify the purpose of the audit. So all of this information, remember, dude, we were talking about the audit charter. So all of this information, the audit subject, audit objective, and next the set audit scope, all of these, and the perform pre-audit planning, all of these things has to go into the audit charter. So when you are setting the audit scope, so you have to identify the systems, functions, unit of organization to include in the review. Remember, we were talking about the same couple of slides prior as well. And performing pre-audit planning, so you have to do conduct a risk assessment, interview auditees, identify regulatory compliance requirements, and identify resources. I mean, we have in detail talked about these things when it comes to audit risk. And finally, determine procedures, select the audit strategy, gather department policies, list interviewees, identify methods and tools. So all of these things are very important at the planning stage. So what is next? Fieldwork and documentation. So now we have planned, we have communicated the plan, and we got the approvers, we have the subject matter experts and others in place. And finally, we have to make sure the fieldwork and documentation is in place. So there are different types of things that you are going to do. Number one, acquire data, right? So we have been talking about different types of audit tests that needs to be conducted. So in order to identify certain areas, you first of all, you have to acquire data. So this by establishing a process to acquire audit related data and use an advanced request list. And then test controls. So there are different types of controls. The testing we have been talking about. So we have to test the controls. And then issue discovery and validation. So it doesn't matter. I mean, you might find many issues available and many issues that is being there. And at the same time, as soon as you discover the issues, you have to make sure you validate them as well, right? So you have to make sure you prepare recommendations to the management and so on and so forth is being done there. And finally, it's very important to document all of it, irrespective of how much of things that you looked into and what kind of things that you being looked after. Particularly, you have to document everything, because remember, I told you from the beginning, it's pretty important for any auditor to provide outcomes. What are the main outcomes? Those are the reports and recommendations to different types of stakeholders. So that's why documentation is very important. And then reporting and follow-ups. So gather report requirements, drafting reports, issue reports, and follow-up. So all of these things are related to reporting and following up. So simply the outcome of the report, and on top of that, the discussions that is going to take up, and what needs to be added into the next audit and so on and so forth needs to be considered, defined, discussed when it comes to reporting and follow-ups. And then audit programs. So an audit program is a step-by-step set of audit procedures and instructions that should be performed to complete an audit. General audit procedures are basic steps in the performance of an audit and usually include. So once again, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just a list for your understanding. So What includes inside the audit program? 1. Obtaining and recording an understanding of audit area subject. Creating risk assessment and general audit plan and schedule. Performing audit planning that includes audit steps and work plan. Doing preliminary review of audit area subject. Evaluating audit areas. Verifying and evaluating the controls designed to meet control objectives. Conducting compliance testing. Conducting substantive testing. Reporting and follow-up. So all of these things, so we were just talking about all of these things all throughout uh, the planning stage. Now it's all about execution. Okay, skills to develop an audit program. So what kind of skills are required to develop an audit program? So risk and threats. So you have to understand the risk and threats. So that's why I started today's conversation with understanding the risk and how risk works and what are the risk types and how to assess risks and all of these things. So one of the key skills are understanding of the enterprise nature and industry to identify the types of risk and threats. Number two, IT space and components. So we are doing information system audits, right? So because of that, it's very important for you to understand the IT space and its components. So you don't need to be an expert. As I always says, you don't need to be an expert to conduct audit, because you can bring in subject matter experts and external auditors. But in order to understand or identify what kind of subject matter experts and what kind of external auditor must be brought in, you have to understand the IT space and its components, the technologies that affects it. And then the testing procedures, different types of testing procedures and how to evaluate all of this. So you have to understand that. Then business risk and IT risk. So once again, that's why I told at the very beginning, you don't need to be very techie person, but you have to have common sense. Plus, you have to have understanding of the businesses, right? So if you understand the business risks and IT risks, so that's a skill that needs to develop the audit plan, sorry, audit program. And finally, the risk assessment. Remember, I've been showing you this all throughout the lecture, and I'm going to do it once again as well. So risk assessment. So holistically, you have to focus on this diagram all throughout your risk or information systems audit life, because there is a risk management process. So you can see there is a communication and consultation, there is monitoring and review, there is recording and reporting, there is scope, context, and criteria. In between all of these, you have risk assessment. And if you understand how the risk assessment is being done, then risk treatment. Risk treatment is not your job, but your job, the part of your job is to recommend what kind of treatment can be done for each and every control that is, basically each and every item in place. So don't forget this, because this is very important for any one of you. Even if you look at your life perspectives, just forget about information system, just from the perspective of your life, okay, or maybe taking this subject as a whole for your third year, second semester. So again, there's a risk of you not getting the sufficient marks to pass the exam, right? So just put that thought into this same model and see, okay, what can be done along with that. And particularly the decision to attend this class, right, or not attend this class, or maybe attend half of the class. Basically all of that, it depends on how much of risk you are taking and how well you are treating the risk, right? So if you are not attending the class, okay, you may have a friend who would be there throughout the class, whom you can talk to and kind of get the slides and all of these things later, and some feedback or notes and so on and so forth later, right? So that can be one of the mitigated facts. or maybe you already have the recording in place, right? So you can listen to the recording later on. Or maybe, okay, you are not worried much about this subject because you already have better results in all of other subjects. So likewise, you can simply look from different angles when it comes to this, right? Okay. Next, audit work papers. So all audit plans, programs, activities, dates, findings, incidents, all of these, as I indicated before as well, you have to make sure all of these things are properly documented. So audit work papers are on that. So when it comes to work papers, so they can be considered as a bridge or interface between the audit objective and the final report, right? And the work paper should provide the seamless transition with the transferability and support for work performed from objectives to report and from report to objectives. In this context, the audit report can be viewed as a particular work paper. So that's the use of audit paper. Okay, so fraud, irregularities, and illegal acts. So when it comes to auditing, so management is primarily responsible for establishing, implementing, and maintaining internal controls. So all of what you are trying to do is you are trying to understand the systems, understand the areas of vulnerability, and particularly provide some report on observations and your recommendations, right? So management is responsible of making sure you are taking necessary controls to avoid frauds, irregularities, and illegal actions. So if you look at this, so IS auditors should have knowledge of fraud indicators and be alert the possibility of fraud and errors while performing an audit. So that is one of your duties. Duty number 2. If indicators of fraud are present, an information systems auditor may communicate the need for the detailed investigation to appropriate authorities. Duty number 3. An information auditor should be aware of legal requirements for the implementation of fraud detection procedures and reporting fraud to appropriate authority. Okay, so this is all about how this can be executed. So we were talking about audits, we were talking about audit planning, and all throughout now we were talking about how to execute this. And on top of this, there are different ways of managing audits as well, right? So how many of you, okay, raise your hands. I mean, just indicate, okay, how many of y'all have some understanding of agile project management, or maybe you know the term agile. Okay, why what are the advantages of agile? Just raise your hands, okay, if you have any understanding of this term agile. Oh, no one. I mean, okay, that might be related to the question that someone raised, whether we are covering the ICT project management, right? So yes, okay, you may have not come across this word agile. So the term agile usually refers to software development and emphasizes individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Responding to change over following a plan. So there are 4 things they have just mentioned, right? So let me kind of highlight this, that then it will be easy for you to understand. Let's have a look here. So individuals and interactions over processes. So you are not worried about processes more, but you are worried about individuals and interactions. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So, what do you need? You need a working software, but you don't worry much about what? Comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So you don't worry much about contract negotiation, but you worried about customer collaboration. Responding to change over following a plan, right? So what does agile means? So it usually defines this. In agile models, design and specification documents are kept to the bare minimum required. Bare minimum. So most of the time, one of the key misunderstanding during the agile is that, okay, you always think that, okay, there is no need of documentation, but it's wrong. You have to make sure the mandatory or the bare minimum documentation are in place. So major part of the documentation is created at the operations and support levels, which occurs much later in the system lifecycle. Okay, so let's look at what are the benefits of agile auditing. So when it comes to agile auditing, so benefits of the agile auditing would be it reduced the end-to-end planning. So you don't need to worry much about planning everything at once. Remember, we had a question also, right? So I mean, there was a task given, and on top of that, there were certain people who have left, and because of that you have to re-look at what you're going to do, right? So simply, if it was agile, you would have reduced the scope and kind of, I mean, that was part of that question as well, right? So they have already communicated that to the management, and simply you looked into what is the best possible step forward, right? So in this particular case, okay, reduce end-to-end planning. So what are the other benefits? Streamline the audit engagements, direct customer collaboration, flexible audit scope. See, so you have flexibility in audit scope. So originally you may have planned for something, then simply remember the answer of that question. So you have to identify whether there is a sufficient or adequate control design is available, right? So you have to look into the scope and kind of reduce the scope because you have less amount of people now. Real-time assurance, where you don't have to wait for 3 months or 6 months or 1 year until you get the audit report generated. And frequent audit plan updates and fraud prevention, right? So these are the benefits of agile auditing. Okay, very quick activity once again. So activity, you're planning an upcoming regulatory readiness audit for your enterprise. The enterprise has international operations and data is fed into several legal financial systems. So question number one, what type of audit approach do you think would be best to perform for this audit? Number two, what type of control would you use as primary control to ensure only sales data is sent to the financial systems connected to the PCI environment? So, okay, remember types of audits? Anyone? We were talking about types of audits. Anyone would like to send the answer in the chats? Okay, what are the types of audits? Remember last time we had this slide? Okay, let me take that. Give me a second, guys. Huh? Okay, sorry about that. So, what are the types of audits? Let me put it into the slide for you to remember with this. Remember this types of audits: information system audit, compliance audit, financial audit, operational audit, integrated administrative, and specialized computer forensics functional. Okay. So relook at this. So what type of audit approach do you think would be best to perform for this IS audit? So they're talking about regulatory readiness audit for your enterprise. Enterprise has international operations. Anyone would like to answer? No? Okay. So I'll leave another question with you all. Just recall what kind of audits that we, I mean, I just recalled you, okay, what type of audits are available. So let's have a look and see, okay, just what would have been, okay, we have some answers. Okay, yes, good. Nice. So what was the activity that we are looking at? So it's basically, uh, they're looking at your planning upcoming regulatory readiness audit for your enterprise. The enterprise has international operations and data is fed into several legacy financial systems. So in this kind of scenario, so what you have to look into is, remember I was talking about Fitch rating, the bank regulations, banking act, all of these things. So it's more of what you are looking to is on compliance audit. Why? Whether we are currently looking into compliances. See, we have information system audit, compliance, financial audit, operational, integrated, administrative, specialized, computer forensics, functional, readiness assessment. So all of these things, right? So out of this, the ideal answer would have been compliance audit. Next one, what type of control you use as the primary control to ensure only sales data is sent to the financial system connected to PCI environment. So question is, what type of control that we discussed today? So what are the different types of controls available? Remember this? So I'm going to just put this into chat. Let's relook at the question. What type of control would you use as the primary control to ensure only sales data is sent to financial systems connected to the PCI environment? So, okay, I have some answers. Okay, I'll give 1 more minute for you to send me the answers. Okay, yes. I can see most of the people are saying preventative control. Yes, of course. This is what require the controls, what is required is preventative control. Why? The type of control you would use as the primary control to ensure only sales data is sent to the financial system connected to the PCI environment. So particularly if you are looking at providing sufficient amount of data, necessary data to a particular system, it's more of like a preemptive control. Okay. So next couple of slides, we are going to talk about audit testing and sampling mechanism methodology. So we will conclude today's session on that so that next week we can finally talk about what do you call evidence collection and audit data analytics and reporting and communication techniques. So and the quality assurance and improvements. So those things we can kind of maybe able to complete within first half of next week's session. And after that, we will look into the next session, I believe. After this, what do we have? Let me have a look. I believe almost everybody has gone through the course module, course outline as well. So next is basically we are going to talk about yeah, little bit more into audit, project management and all of that. So next week, let's see how we can kind of get into it. Today we just started execution part of it. So next is more of like audit, project management, reporting, QA, and all of these things. And on top of that, we will talk a little bit more about reporting and communication techniques and quality assurance improvement, all of these things. And if time permits, we will go into a little bit of laws, regulations, and other things around it. I think ideally I might try to bring in Asanka here. So for the laws and regulation, because he has a master's, he's one of the key people who has masters in this area. So let's see. Yes. So audit testing and sampling methods. So when it comes to audit testing and sampling, so there are two different types of testings available. So one is compliance testing and other part is substance use testing. So what's the difference? So compliance testing is particularly an audit procedure designed to evaluate the operating effectiveness of controls in preventive or detecting and correcting materials weaknesses. So compliance testing is particularly looking at effectiveness of the controls in preventing. But substantive testing is more of like audit process. It's basically an audit procedure designed to detect material weaknesses at the assessment level. So what's the main difference? So one is more of looking at the effectiveness, and other one is more of looking at design. So that's how these two things works. And when it comes to compliance versus substantive testing, so there are different areas that we are going to talk. So compliance testing, so it gathers evidence for the purpose of testing enterprise compliance with the control procedures. It determines whether the controls are being applied in a manner that complies with the management policies and procedures. And of course, it requires understanding by the IS auditor of the test objective and the control being tested. So in the previous question, I mean, they were talking about compliance, right? So the compliance testing is very important in this area. And the difference of substantive testing against the compliance, if you look at substantive testing, they gather evidence to evaluate the integrity. So let me kind of highlight this for yours. Give me a second. Here, yes. So what's the main difference? So compliance testing, your main purpose is for testing. But substantial testing is to evaluate the integrity. In the compliance testing, so it determines whether controls are being applied. In substance use testing, it checks the integrity of the actual processing. And compliance testing requires understanding by the IS auditor of the test objective and the control. But in substance use testing, the amount of testing required directly correlates to the level of internal controls identified by the compliance tests. So it's basically talking about the amount of testing required. So basically, it's about testing the integrity, right? So it's required direct correlation between the level of internal controls to be identified by the compliance test. Okay. So when if whether there is a relationship between compliance and substance use testings, you have to look into, right? So first of all, you have to review the system to identify controls, test compliance to determine whether the controls are functioning, and evaluate the controls to determine the basis of reliance and the nature, scope, timing of the substance use test, and use two types of substance use test to evaluate the validity of the data. Test balances and transaction, perform analytical review procedures. So this is the relationship. So that's what you can see here. So amount of testing required to directly correlate to the level of internal controls identify the compliance test. So substantive test is making sure it evaluates the integrity of the actual process, right? So that's what you have to understand clearly. So in any of these type of testings, it's what you are going to, as I indicated before as well, what you are going to do is sampling. So you are not going to evaluate the holistic system or holistic organization. You're not going to audit the all some complete organization. You particularly take a sample. So there are different I mean basically different modes of samples. So you have statistic samples, non-statistic samples, and so forth, different sampling methods. I believe when you as management students, you may have understand or you may have already learned about sampling, right? So when it comes to sampling, you have to do certain things. This, I believe you almost have some understanding, but of course, if not, better you do some what do you call some reading about sampling. So how sampling would work is particularly, first of all, it determines the objectives, define the population, determine the method, calculate the sampling size, select the sample, evaluate the sample. So what are the examples? Just imagine, okay, then nowadays, now we are almost nearing an presidential election, right? So certain people start saying, okay, certain particular politician is going to win the president's election. So how are they come to those conclusions? Okay, they might say, okay, 80% of the citizens are saying that it's the case, and here they are providing, okay, 35% of age 18 to 24 are saying this, 24 to 35 says this, and all of these things. So are they going to ask, have they come to you and ask such question? No, right? Have they come to me and ask? No. So what are they going to do and what are they doing? So particularly they are looking into or they identify. So we have 22 million people in the country. So they identify, okay, substantial population would have been, or some substantial size of sample would have been 1,000 people or 2,200 people. So you ask those questions from those people, uh, and you come to conclusion, right? So likewise, you have to, there are different ways of sampling as well. They might take 10 from Colombo, 10 from 100 from Colombo, 100 from Kandy, and maybe 100 each from each district, or maybe some substantial numbers from each province. So likewise, right? So sampling. So when it comes to sampling, there are different type of sampling. So I'm not going to talk about sampling here because I'm not going to anyway talk about it, and I'll skip these areas about sampling because that is too much getting into it. But just to understand that when it comes to information systems audit, you are not you don't have sufficient resources, time, money, or basically budget to conduct comprehensive audits all the time. So you have to make sure that you define the scope, and on top of that, you have to identify resources, budgets, and external resources that you need. So in order to do that, you have to understand all of these things, and you are not going to question each and every one in your organization as well. You just simply pick samples from here and there. Maybe you observe people who come to the office from 8 to 10, and then afterwards from 1 to 3, or whoever goes out of the office, and so on. So simply you can come up with uh, substantial sampling method also, and so when you are doing it. But remember one key important thing. What? As an IS auditor, you have to make sure that you justify your selection, and you justify why you have omitted certain set of people out of the sample. You have to make sure you justify why you are going to profile this set of people in taking into the audit as well. So all of these things, remember the word justification. So you have to have sufficient justification to get any of these things done, irrespective of whether you are doing the control-based, risk-based, sampling, whatever. So you have to almost all the time remember that you have to have a justification with you. So here also, that's why in general there are two sampling methods. One is statistical sampling, and second one is non-statistical sampling, which is also called judgment sampling. So when you test the judgment sampling, you have to make sure that you have sufficient justification on your selection. Okay, it's 8 o'clock. Thank you very much for you all joining today. And there is a quiz we were supposed to do. I think there was some issue with the LMS, which we couldn't do the questions. But anyway, I will open it up for next week, and uh, we'll try to kind of get 10 quizzes done, and out of that you can select 4 of them for your final results, whichever the highest marks you will get it uh, out of that. So look forward to see you next week, and we'll discuss the rest of the execution part, and on top of that we'll try to focus on the next session, which is about more of project management, reporting, and QA, and improvement of audit. Thank you very much. Good night.